What just happened? Oh, come on! So if you have experienced this sort of crashes with your PC, well then definitely stay tuned. This is the right place to be, and we are going to solve this issue, and I'm going to tell you exactly what the problem is. So, keeping it simple here, if you are running games and you're experiencing these sort of crashes like I did with Starfield, it can be very well demanding, then definitely one direction that could pinpoint to a problem is your GPU. Now, in order to get that out of the table, you'll have to first of all check your GPU, and what I would recommend is to basically remove the GPU from the PCI Express slot, check the PCI slot, check the pins on the GPU, check of course that you have all your power connectors seated properly all the way into the GPU. Of course, it's vitally important to check your 40 series graphics cards with that power connector because you don't want it melting. Thank you once again NVIDIA for making a half-ass finished product, asking a lot of money for it, and then blaming it on us because we were just stupid not to be able to put it all the way in, and that's why the connector melted. Thank you. So if you are having these issues whenever you are gaming, like I just did when ramping up Starfield over there, one direction that you could look into is definitely your GPU. Now the other culprit could be very well a PSU related stuff, but let's just get things started off with the GPU. In a nutshell, whenever you're running games, then definitely that GPU is going to be put to the test. So you're going to have increased strain on the power rails and of course on the cooling side of that GPU. So what I would recommend you to do first of all is to check visually that your GPU is okay, both on the power connector side and on the PCI slot side, and of course to see if there's any clogged dirt or maybe some loose debris somewhere in the fans, and this way maybe the fans are not spinning. So since I have this issue, let's just do it together. So here we have the GPU itself. We have removed it from the PCI slot there. You can definitely check the PCI slot by yourself just to see that there's nothing stuck in between there in the pins inside, or there is any loose debris or it looks damaged in any sort of way, and mine looks good, so that's definitely fine. Alright, so you can definitely start with the pigtails here. This is how I call the power connectors anyway, and this being a 30s card, I don't suspect that I'm gonna have any sort of issues, and of course there's no sort of visual melting issues that I could see with these connectors. But definitely if you are running some sort of a 40 series card, then you should check these because that problem with melting connectors is still a thing out there even now. And yeah, thanks NVIDIA for that once again. Okay, now that that's out of the way, we have to continue with the visual inspection of the GPU itself. Now, first of all, you can go over the fans and check to see if there's no loose debris in there that might be preventing your fans from spinning, or maybe some extreme cases of, extreme dust up, or I should say extreme dust buildup that keeps those fans from spinning. And that's definitely not the case here. And you can as well continue and check the fins to see if there's any sort of loose debris or maybe some extreme dust buildup in there. And this doesn't seem to be it either with my card. So once you have completed your visual check of the cooling system and you have defined that everything is basically running and looks as it should, then definitely you have to continue with the power connector on the GPU to as well see if there's any sort of melting or there's any indication of anything wrong with the connectors themselves, if the camera would focus. And as you can see here, once again, this being a 30 series card, they look okay. They look in perfectly working order, so I don't suspect anything to be wrong with the GPU this way. Now, of course, another sort of issue that you can be having with your GPU, if you are running something like MSI Afterburner, I'll get into that a little bit later, and you see the temperatures are not being okay, even though you visually checked your cooling system to be fine. An indication could be that your thermal pads are being worn out and that you have to replace your thermal pads. So that could be one issue or one indication for you if you see your temperature just overall being so high in MSI Afterburner, and even though everything looks fine and dandy on your GPU, you're still experiencing that temperature limit, and maybe that's one way that the system protects itself by shutting off because of those high temperatures. Now, for the purpose of this video, I'll just consider that the thermal pads are okay because I know them to be okay in this GPU, and I would suspect that probably, I hope the same is going to apply for your GPU in your case. But yeah, that's definitely one thing to look out for. And this being said, I'll just move on with the next troubleshooting step to see what could be the culprit. Of course, just being in here and having the PC open, it's a good idea to visually inspect your motherboard as well to see there's no loose debris or maybe some loose components in there or anything that looks out of the ordinary that might attract your eye, like a loose connector or something like that along those lines. And if you determine that everything is fine, then you can move on to troubleshoot other things. Now, I have already inspected my my motherboard and I know it to be in good working order, so I don't expect to be any sort of damage from the motherboard or any sort of issues caused by the motherboard itself with my issue. So this being said, I'll just move on to the next thing. So since I know the motherboard works, just for a sanity check, I will be removing that BIOS battery right there in order to do a BIOS reset on this motherboard. Now, if you have one of those fancy, you know, very overly expensive motherboards, then definitely you might be having one of those reset BIOS on the back of it, on the back IO. I don't have that here, and most of you, I suspect, that don't either. So what you can do, you can basically remove that battery from your motherboard, keep it off it for about a few minutes, and that way the BIOS will reset itself, and maybe you can get rid of your problem that way. So what you would want to do is basically get one of these plastic picks, or anything plastic would definitely be better than something metallic, and there is a small metal pin here that just has to be, well, pushed to the side, and then you'll have your batteries taken out of the board. Have you noticed IKEA battery? Yeah, right. My IKEA CR2032 battery, it's out, and I'm just going to leave the system like this for a few minutes before reinstalling my IKEA working battery. Now, with that battery removed from that system there, what you can do to basically help the overall battery, or I should say capacitor discharge, is to hold down your power button for a few seconds like we just did here, and this should just discharge the whole system, basically using up any residual energy that might be left within your whole system. It could be in the power supply unit, it could be on the motherboard side in some caps and stuff like that. So this is definitely one good step to do whenever you are trying to reset your BIOS switch. And with this system now being reset, we can definitely go ahead and reinstall this battery in it, and just like that, we have it back in place, and the system should now have a reset BIOS. Okay, so the system just shut off. So by this point in this video, we have determined that both that the GPU is good, and also we have done a BIOS reset on that motherboard, and none of this had seemed to be fixing our issues. So the next major culprit that I would determine on my system anyway is the PSU. So this being said, of course, we are going to start off with a visual inspection of the PSU. You wouldn't want that to catch on fire, now would you? So like before, the least that you can do is take your time and give it a visual inspection. So what we have here is, well, in case any of you guys are wondering, this is the Seasonic Connect 750 watts power supply. It is a modular power supply, which is a little bit, well, I would say different from the other power supplies, in the sense that the main power supply is right here, and this is basically connected to this module right here. This lights up very nicely, and from here you have all the, well, power leads that go all to the components of your PC. Now let's check here really quickly that everything seems to be okay. There doesn't seem to be any sort of dust buildup or any sort of melting issues with any of the connectors. The connectors look good as well, so there isn't any sort of problem with the connectors either. And well, you could do, of course, you could take an extra step and remove all the connectors to check inside to see that everything is running smoothly. Or you can just take your time and basically remove this from your system and remove all these pigtails and see that everything is fine in there, where the pins actually sit inside the connector itself. So what I have right here, I've actually taken my time and removed that from there, and you can definitely do a visual inspection of each and every one of those pins to see that everything is in working order, and everything seems to be okay on this front as well. And there is, of course, this other side to it as well, and you can take your time to visually inspect the other side as well to see that everything is working fine, and everything seems to be okay on this end as well. So we have the system right back up and booted, and by this time I have a pretty good idea, and I think that the PSU is the culprit. I definitely think that this GPU together with the CPU is drawing too much power from this PSU, especially when running something like Starfield, and because of that I'm going to use hardware monitor alongside with MSI Afterburner in order to monitor what's going on. And after all of that, we are going to use basically another PSU hooked up to the system in parallel with the existing one in order to offload all the power draw of that GPU from the PSU in the system and basically try and get it stable that way. And if that works, then definitely I have to buy myself a new PSU, because this is too little for the amount of power that the system requires out of it. So I have opened up MSI Afterburner and also hardware monitor right here, because I want to see what the system is doing in real time. So having a look here, we are actually going to undercloak this GPU. So as you can see, we are doing so by a fair margin. It was really sitting at its standard frequency at above, around 2000 megahertz, or just slightly above. It seems a bit too much actually. Anyway, we are undervolting this, so we are just going to put it around 1400 megahertz. So that's how we are going to run this GPU. And not only that, but we are going to leave the memory clock as it is right here. And we are also going to reduce the power limit to something like 85%, because I don't want to draw as much power with this GPU as is running on a single PSU, because I want to first stress test it or find a point where it's stable. Do keep in mind though that running any sort of games here, of course, this includes Starfield at its standard resolution, or I should say its standard settings, the GPU is going to crash because it's not receiving enough watts from the PSU. So let's load up the game here and see exactly how we are sitting in real time. Going through hardware info right here, you can see what the system is doing. First of all, you have the Ryzen 9 3900X, so this is my CPU, that is using up some 116 watts, so that was the maximum power it draw. Anyway, let's say a 115 watts. The rest of the things here, as you can see, fans, and you know, you have your, of course, your motherboard, you have your drives in there and everything. So we can say, let's say another 100 watts. I know this is a bit too much, but just to be on the safe side, with all the fans and LEDs and stuff running in the system right there. So yeah, let's just say 100 watts. And of course, I'm so interested about the GPU. So we have the 3090 right here, which is using right now a maximum of 290 watts. So 290 watts, we are already at 500 watts on this 750 watts PSU. But do keep in mind that any PSU, as a rule of thumb, is a good idea not to run it past 80% of its capacity. So if we are going to take that 750 watts and just you know, calculate 80% out of that, 80% times 750 watts, so we should be hovering at around a maximum of 600 watts power draw, or I should say total power draw from this PSU right now. And as I've mentioned before, we are sitting just close to what was it, 290? Yeah, so we are just, you know, shy more or less of 100 watts from its total output that it can give us. So this means that with the GPU, with the settings and this underclock, I should say, this is what we are getting with it. So so this being said, of course you could just be running your system like this. There's no sort of long-term harm coming to it if you are just going to undervolt and undercloak your GPU, but you're not going to get the amount of performance out of it, or not the well-rated performance out of it. So you know, if you're okay with that, then definitely some way to run your system. But I would encourage you to actually upgrade your PSU, because you know, you want to get the most out of your hardware since you have already paid for it. Okay, so this game seems to be pretty stable at the moment, so I'm going to do a slight overclock to see how things are going to be running then. So let's go back here to MSI Afterburner and basically try and get a working OC out of it. We are going to be actually increasing the power limit here, and we are going to do a slight overclock here of around 250 on the memory and around some 100 hertz on the core clock. Maybe we can do it at 350. Okay, so let's do that. Okay, so the system just shut off right after doing a slight OC on the GPU right there, and I was expecting that we are just hovering at the point where the PSU can barely manage the workload. And yeah, I think we went over it. So right now the system is basically in a limp mode, or I would say in a standby mode, because you can see still clearly see that we have the DIMMs here light up. And basically whenever I press the power button, nothing happens. Pressing the reset button, nothing happens. So in order to get this back up and running as it is right now, I basically have to switch off the power supply, wait for a few moments before all and everything shuts off, and you will see the DIMMs here just going off by themselves like so. And yeah, now I can switch back on the power supply and basically boot up the system normally, back up and running without any sort of issues, until I run Starfield again with those settings and crash it again. So I'm going to hook up another power supply unit to this system right here just to test out my theory, and then we are going to crank it up right again and see if we can get the game to be stable with those settings, running basically the GPU off another PSU. So what I have right here is basically another Seasonic Connect 750 watts power supply. Yeah, from my good old mining days when I was scalped for my 3090 right here, and that's why I decided to put it to good use and basically do some mining with it in the downtime. And since I have this well, PSU which is just lying around, I am going to test out my theory by basically installing this into the system. And the way we are going to rig it up is basically doing it like we did it for mining, or miners did it for mining with these graphics cards. So we are going to basically take off the pigtails from the GPU because we are not going to feed it the proper power through the pigtails that are coming from the PSU in the system, and we are just going to use these external ones that are coming off out of this PSU right here. So let's just hook them on. Okay, so now basically we have everything set up, so we are going to power on the power supply like so. So this is the external power supply. As you can see, we have some nice LEDs here, and we are going to boot up the system now. So the way we have the system set up right now is basically you are going to get the maximum of 65 watts from the PCIe slot there on the motherboard. That's coming off straight from the motherboard installed into the system. But the rest of the power demand for that GPU, it is going to come externally from this other PSU that we are going to use. So I am going to crank up the settings once again for the system, and we are going to be running Starfield and see if we can get this system to crash again. I am just going to give it a few minutes here and try basically to get it to crash, and I'm also going to increase slightly the OCs on this GPU, basically trying to get to a breaking point. But right now, as you can see, let's go into hardware info. Okay, so let's just see how much watts did we manage to draw from this PSU right now, with it being with the, well, just slightly boosted OC settings there. So we were doing 500 watts or so just before. Now let's see where we are exactly. So we'll use the same 100 watts for the system. We'll add up whatever the CPU has been using. So that's 128. Let's just say 125. So 100 plus 125. There we go. And let's go over to the GPU side of things. And we have been using some 370 watts of power. So yeah, as you can see, we are sitting around 600 watts right now. And that's pretty stable with this game as is, and that's pretty fine because we are basically just spreading the load between the PSU installed in the system and the PSU that we have running besides it. Right, so I have been playing this game for far too long now. I've been a little bit caught up, but definitely this has solved my issues. So in a jerry-rig kind of way, I'm actually running right now the system on a 1400 watts power supply. Although, yeah, I know there are two power supplies broken up in 750 watts power each, but yeah, this was just a way to prove that my theory is correct. And it is definitely correct. Regardless of how long I play the game, now I don't experience any crashes. When, well, as before, if I just did a minor increase there on an OC on the GPU and played it for a few minutes, I got a crash. So definitely I have learned that the PSU is a limiting factor inside my system. Now, if you are running into similar issues with your system, it is definitely worth a look into your PSU. If you don't have the money right now to fork out for a brand new PSU, then definitely maybe what you can do is to rent out a bigger PSU from someplace, or maybe ask a friend to give you its PSU, just to try and figure out if that is the actual cause of your problems in the system. But as a rule of thumb for you guys, you should stick to that 80% of the total power distribution of the PSU. So don't try to use up more than 80% of its total rating, because you could experience crashes or maybe get up into some situations where the system is not going to function correctly. Now, with reputable and very well established titles like Seasonic within the PSU world, definitely you're not going to have a problem on the safety side, so you're not going to be starting off any fires as long as everything looks correctly and everything is installed correctly. Even if you're going to max it out, you're just going to have general instability with your system. But if you are going to be using some Chinese, nobody heard of brand of PSU, and you are going to crank it up, you might have issues, as I have learned the hard way doing some GPU mining back in the day, and I really don't recommend you go that route. So whatever you do, stick with the brand that you can definitely put your confidence behind, because you know you invested a lot of your hard-earned money and time in that system, and I'm pretty sure you don't want to see it go up in flames or anything, right? And I hope that this video was informative enough for you guys. And don't forget, if you have any sort of comments, you can drop them down in the box below in the comments, and also you can reach me at my Discord, so you'll find the server links down in the video description as well. And I do encourage you guys to go and hop on in there, because you can always have a chance to talk to me live, and that way maybe hopefully I can get to solve your situation faster. Anyway guys, that's it for me. Stay awesome guys, and see you in the next one.